Hello, everyone, and welcome back to PeppTalk. It's so great to be back. My name is Alexa, and this is Coby.
Hey, everybody. Good to be back.
So great to be back. So today is a special episode. We are going to be discussing the recent Academic Freedom Conference on the campus. Coby, do you want to introduce the conference?
Yeah, absolutely. So we get the special opportunity of talking about academic freedom today. And there's really no one better from our campus we could have with us than Jennifer Smith, who is the Associate Provost and Associate Professor of English.
That's right.
Jennifer, good to have you on the podcast with us.
Thanks for having me.
So we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the conference here in a little bit, but I would start off, this isn't the first thing that you've done on campus to kind of promote academic freedom and healthy conversation. I've been the beneficiary of what we call dialogue dinners here on campus that kind of have a similar goal. Could you tell us a little bit, what are those things? How did that come about? And we can get into the conference after that.
Of course. Dialogue Dinners is a series that's been going on for 3 years now. It started out as a faculty development program. Now it's extended to faculty and staff, and we're growing it now to include students as well. The goal of the program is to bring people together to read books, listen to lectures, and have great conversations about those things.
That's awesome.
Have connection across campus, and especially to start to talk about ideas that maybe are percolating in one area of the campus, but which other areas of the campus don't have a chance to hear about. Mm-hmm. It's, as you can imagine, it's easy for people to assume what's going on somewhere else based on maybe rumor or shallow interpretations of what's going on. And this is a chance to really get to know what's going on in other parts of the campus in a very deep and intellectual way. It's
really good. And it's not always easy conversations. It's not always fluffy. It's nitty-gritty, difficult, but important stuff, and talked about in a way that I think is charitable and intellectually engaging. And for me, as a participant in Dialogue Dinners this past year, some very real friendships came out of it in a way that I was really grateful for. And recently, we've kind of expanded a similar kind of a thing to a national level in that, Jennifer, you put on an academic freedom conference, a national conference on the idea of academic freedom at faith-based institutions in particular. Is this correct?
Yeah, that's right. I think maybe the best way to explain this is from the point of view of a problem statement. What's the problem statement here? It's that many people believe that academic freedom is not possible at faith-based institutions.
Interesting.
They see faith as being a limiting factor in academic freedom. So the question that we start with is, one, is it possible to have academic freedom at a faith-based institution? Or is it somehow undermining what it means to be a faith-based institution? And if the answer to that is yes, it is possible, which is the position that Pepperdine has taken, the question then is, what does it look like at a faith-based institution? And how is that different from what you might experience at a secular institution? And how would it look at different faith-based institutions? Because we don't all have the same religious commitments, even if we have religious commitments.
Totally. So there's kind of the two-part. There's the philosophical question of, can this even exist? What does it look like? And then there's plenty of slip between the cup and the lip, as my dad would always say, as far as, okay, we believe in academic freedom, but how does this actually flesh itself out on campus? And so what we've got, I'm gonna play for us here in just a second, is President Gash's opening remarks that kind of set the tone for the conference and opened up the conversation. Nothing else from the conference can really be talked about in detail or attributed to people, because I think this is one of the beautiful rules of both the Dialogue Dinners and the Academic Freedom Conference, is you've created this environment intentionally where people know that they're not going to be quoted, they're not going to be misquoted. They can grapple with ideas together and say what they really think and try and seek truth together without an environment of fear. But all that to say, we have permission from President Gash to hear his opening remarks on the podcast. So that'll be kind of a conversation starter for us, and we'll come back to you in just a minute.
Like you, we believe it's vital for our classrooms to be places of robust dialogue, of thoughtful debate, and mutual respect. And what better way to ensure that by intentionally modeling that for our students as faculty, staff, and administration. And that's what the Dialogue Dinner programming has been accomplishing, and that's what we're seeking to accomplish over the course of the next couple days. to grapple honestly and earnestly with difficult but important issues, seeking truth together. Now, what I'm not going to do today is to give you a complete history of academic freedom on the university campus. Patrick Deneen is going to be doing some of that in a few minutes. I'm also not here to give you a complete definition of what academic freedom means in every context or what it should look like on every campus. I suspect that if I could do that, then we could spend the next 2 days on the beach rather than in classrooms and in auditoriums. My hope, my aim of this, and from the beginning, is to convene a conversation, to begin the conversation rather than to end it. You're all here so you can grapple together, both with the high-level concept of academic freedom and with the boots-on-the-ground implications of what academic freedom means in the classroom and on campus, in particular in institutions of faith. And I think that distinction is an important one. While academic freedom is something that nearly all universities would claim to cherish, there is something distinct about the relationship between academic freedom and institutions of faith in particular. There are distinct challenges associated therewith, to be sure. Certainly different to talk about academic freedom at a university with a particular set of guiding values than it is to talk about academic freedom at an institution that would claim complete neutrality on nearly every issue. I would contend that there are also some distinct advantages to being an institution of faith when it comes to producing a culture of true academic freedom, of genuine pursuit of truth. As you know, the idea of the academy itself was originally evolved from the idea of a monastery where the monks would preserve and pass along their cultural heritage for the good of the church. And nearly every elite university in the country started off as an institution of faith, with a stated purpose of training up well-educated clergy and lay people. You just look at the mottos of these schools that are 200 years old and think, how in the world is that school's motto that, given what's happened since then? This begs the question, has the move away from faith and values truly been a step in the right direction when it comes to preserving academic freedom, when it comes to encouraging robust, respectful debate, when it comes to enabling the relentless pursuit of truth? Looking at the near constant battles over campus cancellation, hate speech, and the like, it's hard to argue in the affirmative. The problem, of course, is that a true values-neutral education does not exist. Everyone educates from one perspective or another, whether they're honest about it or not. So when universities attempt an education that is thoroughly secular or apparently neutral, completely devoid of values and unbiased on all fronts, they invariably often end up with one ideology or another slipping in through the back door, sometimes but not always unnoticed. G.K. Chesterton has defined education as the soul of a society as it passes from one generation to another, and it's impossible to pass down a neutral soul. The good thing about institutions of faith like Pepperdine and your institutions is that we're honest about what sort of soul we're attempting to pass on. We're honest about the perspective that we're educating from. And my contention for us to consider tonight is that our perspective is actually uniquely suited for cultivating an environment of true academic freedom oriented toward the pursuit of truth. This is perhaps understood by examining Pepperdine Affirms statement. I'm going to read 3 tenets of that statement that I think are inherently connected, but I would encourage you to Google at some point Pepperdine Affirms statement on your own time. The 3 I'm going to focus on are first. The first one is Pepperdine affirms that God is. No ambiguity. I was just talking to one of the regents, the trustees from Wheaton, and I remember going on the campus for the first time. For Christ and his kingdom, everywhere you look, no ambiguity there. Number 1, that God is. The second affirmation, that he is uniquely revealed in Christ. So no ambiguity there, that's who we are. And the third, that goes deeper into what we're talking about, is that Pepperdine affirms that truth, having nothing to fear from investigation, should be pursued relentlessly in all disciplines. These three statements, along with the others that accompany them and talk about the infinite dignity of the student and the importance of freedom, they form the bedrock of our distinct approach to academic freedom. It's distinct, firstly, because we believe that you don't find truth by sitting in an echo chamber, by never interacting with people different from you, or being told what to believe. We're not a place, like you're not a place, that seeks to indoctrinate. We're not a place that says, you are canceled, or we are a place that says, help me understand, tell me more, let's talk, let's reason together. We're a place that seeks to provide our faculty with real freedom to explore the most difficult and important questions in their disciplines. We believe that there's value in sitting across the table from someone who thinks differently than you, and rather than seeing them as an enemy, but seeing them instead as a person created in the image of God. We believe that it's possible to have tough conversations and even intense debates on difficult topics and remain friends afterward. In fact, that's what we're all here to do today and the next few days. But as a Christian institution, our approach to academic freedom is also distinct in another way. When we say that truth has nothing to fear from investigation, we imply that truth really does exist and can be found through investigation. Saying that we have a real hope of finding truth is much different, of course, than saying, I personally already have the truth on every subject, or that I can never learn or be proven wrong. We live in a culture where belief in real, solid truth is not a given for everyone. There are many who sadly believe that we inhabit individual, entirely subjective worlds with no true reality to be found, grasped, or shared. But we as an institution believe that when we set out to look for truth, we really do have the opportunity to find it. And we believe that not only is truth out there, but it's rooted deeply in the character of God, uniquely revealed in Christ. And as Jesus himself said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So our desire to cultivate academic freedom isn't groundless. It does not exist for its own sake. We desire to foster an environment of academic freedom because we believe it's vital to the pursuit of the truth. And we believe that robust dialogue is often the very best tool we have for doing so. It's because truth really exists and has nothing to fear from investigation that it should be pursued relentlessly in every discipline. Think of it like the game of tetherball. If you're not familiar with tetherball, it's a playground game where the ball is tied to a pole and you're batting it in circles back and forth. Because the ball is tethered to the pole, you can hit it back and forth with complete freedom and intensity, knowing that it will always orbit back to the pole. Similarly, when we approach academic freedom, it's tethered to a real belief in and the pursuit of truth, and to Christ as the source of truth. We can explore ideas and grapple with even the most difficult topics together, knowing ultimately that the search for truth will lead us back to its source. Far from stifling academic inquiry, this distinctive Christian approach is uniquely suited to protecting and promoting it. Because we seek to emulate the radical hospitality of Jesus, we welcome others to our table and seek earnestly to understand and to learn from each other. As Pepperdine's former, a few provosts ago, Daryl Tippins, used to say regularly, the best measure of how Christian we are as an institution is how welcome non-Christians feel. Another one of our professors, Dr. John Barton, who leads our Center for Faith and Learning, talks about not an open table, but a hosted table. This isn't a free-for-all. This is a hosted table. We decide as a Christian institution what's happening at that table. You're invited to join us, but it's not an open table. And this is something that I'm sure Patrick is going to talk about as well. Because we seek to live a life of moral and intellectual humility, we are far from thinking that we can approach any conversation already knowing all of the answers. In talking to you, I know that there is always something more I can learn from you. And because we believe truth has nothing to fear from investigation and that it's uniquely revealed in Christ, we can inquire relentlessly and honestly, knowing that all truth belongs to God no matter where it's found. And that's what I hope that we can all do over the course of this conference.
Okay, so we just listened to President Gash's remarks, and we'll get into some of the details and the ideas that opens up here in a bit. But I would love to hear, Jennifer, academic freedom is not just something that we were talking about at the conference. It was something that we were actually trying to put into practice. We were trying to put people in rooms and practice healthy dialogue and grappling with things together. So I would love to hear from your perspective, how did it go? What were the conversations like? How did the conference go down? What was what you expected? What maybe surprised you? How did it all go?
Well, I think maybe the key word here is colloquium, which was part of the subtitle to the conference, because the core of the conference was not what you would experience in a normal conference, but actually role-playing. So the goal of each of the 2 major days of the conference was to break people up into groups of about 12 per room, where we role-played realistic scenarios that engaged with difficult subjects that they had just heard 2 people speak about in the morning. Yeah. So the morning started out with a conversation by 2 scholars who were engaging with hard topics. Our 2 major topics were on diversity on the first day, and then on the second one, sex and gender. Mm-hmm. After that fed everyone's thinking, in the afternoon we gathered together to have these role-playing scenarios. And that's where we really grappled with the praxis side. Yeah. So I'd say one of the challenges whenever you're talking about a subject that everyone recognizes is important, let's say it's diversity, in this case it's academic freedom, what you sometimes encounter in these environments is the tendency to talk a lot about the importance of it and not have the opportunity to actually practice doing the hard things. And that kind of thing can lead to a lot of virtue signaling. Yeah. And as you can imagine, that's exactly what it is that you need to avoid if your goal is to actually seek truth and to practice it. So the 2 words that I think of all the time are culture formation. What are the practices that we need to engage in as a university campus that allows us to continue to do what we do as an educational institution, as an institution that's invested in teaching and research. And that's all about culture. So those are practical things, not just abstract philosophical concepts.
Totally. And I think that's interesting, too, that you say culture is such the right word to me there, because it's something that goes deeper than just a set of like rules or things that we always do. And yet these kind of like liturgies or things that we practice are what build the culture, where when you come into a place, you can feel a thing in the air of this is how it is at this particular university, but that's not built from nowhere. You actually can intentionally invest or build in a particular way to create it.
Yeah, I'd say historically the way that institutions have engaged with academic freedom is to create an academic freedom policy or statement of some sort. Yeah. Now, that's a beginning point, and it's an important one, and one that every institution, I think, should engage in, whether it is public or private or secular or faith-based. That's an important step. But if you stop with the law, you actually have nothing. What you need in any institution is the kind of healthy culture that perpetuates the practices that law was intended to protect. And in the case of academic freedom, you need things like friendship and trust, a certain degree of intimacy and an openness. Those things are really, really important. I'm an English medieval, so the other part of my life is to teach medieval literature. And the word free in Middle English also means generous. So when you talk about someone who is free, what does it mean to be free? It means to be generous with the other person. So who is free in spirit? You're free in spirit because you can open yourself up to them and offer them something new. So when I think about academic freedom, I think about it less as my individual rights. So like, what am I able to do as a researcher or as a teacher? And more about what are the ways that I can be generous to other people? What are the academic conditions that allow me to share what I know with other people? And how too can they do that with me?
Yeah, that's really good. And I think it's interesting too that the thing I think you consider in these sorts of conversations is obviously, as President Gash got into a little bit, there's always going to be some sort of limits or some sort of walls for playing the game, right? He uses the analogy of tetherball. There's always going to be some sort of a rope that ties the ball. Otherwise, there's no game at all. But the interesting question then is like, what exactly is the pole and rope like at your particular institution, right? How do you build this in such a way that people are free to express, to give generously in such a way that it builds up the entire community into something that you want it to be? As the conference went on, were there any takeaways on that front? I know there's, in some ways, it's a good thing that we might leave with more questions than answers, but what did people come to? What were the ideas they grappled with on that front?
I'd say be kind and clear rather than nice and vague. Because what happens is that in order to maintain relationships, sometimes people will not be as explicit as perhaps they ought to be in an intellectual environment. But then when you're not explicit about what you actually believe about a subject, it's hard to do the intellectual work of grappling with those ideas. So how can you be kind and clear rather than nice and vague?
Yeah.
Those are really, I think those are good challenging questions for us as we engage with these things.
'Cause we love to be nice and vague in our culture today. I feel like that's because the currency is like, oh, I don't want to say anything that could possibly cause you to think about me differently. And so the more comfortable thing is to say something. It's in some ways, it really is dishonest, is to say something that you might be able to interpret as vaguely not being in disagreement with you so that we can kind of keep walking together as we were before. But that's not better for anyone.
It's not, because it doesn't allow you to play.
Yeah.
So if you play, you need to have rules of some sort. Those are the conditions under which play happens. And intellectual play is a very important part of a university campus. So, like, I'll give another example from literature. When you write a poem, usually there are some parameters involved. If you're writing a sonnet, it's 14 lines. It has to have a certain number of syllables per line, even a stress pattern. We have poetry, we have sonnets because there are rules involved. Those rules allow us to create. If you are an athlete, the rules don't limit you. They provide the conditions that allow you to play the game. Now, depending on the space that you're in, those rules might change a little bit. So you might have a different set of rules in a lecture hall as opposed to a seminar setting. You're definitely going to have a different set of rules when you're in a classroom versus when you're in a dorm room.
Yeah.
But there's always going to be some sort of cultural practice that is limiting the kinds of engagements that are possible. Now, that being said, a university needs to be particularly invested in the kinds of cultural practices that allow us to create and for a faith-based institution to worship.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think on a personal note, I converted when I was in graduate school. And I think it's, from where I am, it seems to me to be critical for an institution that is committed to faith to leave space for conversion. What does that mean? It means that people have to have the ability to choose over time. And sometimes people are maybe earlier or later in whatever faith narrative they're a part of. But if you don't preserve that space for choice, you also eliminate the opportunity to worship.
Yeah. You make me think too. I'm a big nerd for the work of G.K. Chesterton, who Jim quoted there, and he has this quote where he's talking about coming to Christianity in his conversion experience, and he says one of the things I noticed about Christianity was that while it had established a rule and order, the chief purpose of that rule and order was to give room for good things to run wild. Which is the exact sort of thing you're talking about, right? That if he says, the analogy he uses is if you have a 1,000-foot cliff that you build your house on and you build a playground for your kids and you build a fence around the cliff, you don't build the fence around the cliff because you hate your kids and you want to take away the last foot of space that they had to play. You build the fence because without the fence, they might end up tumbling over the edge, but more likely they're probably going to end up huddled in the middle afraid. Because the fence actually gives room for them to play. It gives room for them to in our case, right, discover and think and wrestle and actually play the game of intellectual inquiry. And this brings to me too. Actually, this was put into practice in the way you set up the conference too. I referenced this earlier just briefly, but could you talk to us a little bit about the rules of engagement that were in place that kind of allowed us to play there?
Yeah, we practice what's called Chatham House Rule, which is not something that we invented, but it's essentially a practice where what goes on within the room, you cannot quote from people as individuals. So there's no attribution to the quotations. So of course you ought to take the ideas that you've engaged with and bring them out to your own institutions and to your own thinking. But there's a level of confidentiality that allows people to express ideas, to try ideas out in a way that's really important. Fear is very hard for learning. In fact, fear is a circumstance that prevents learning. And also fear, I think, from the Christian point of view, is something that we need to work at reducing or eliminating as much as possible. Because what fear says is that you don't actually believe in forgiveness.
That's right.
If you believe truly in a forgiving God, then you have to like open yourself up to error sometimes.
Yeah.
Not because one wants to sin, but because without opening yourself up to other people, there's no opportunity to grow and learn. You become isolated.
Well, and this is Luther. He has this quote that people get confused about what it means a lot, where he says, sin boldly, but believe in Christ more boldly still, right? And he's not saying like, oh, you should try to sin, but he's saying you can't be so afraid that you don't live because you don't really believe in the forgiveness of Christ. You've got to be willing to open yourself to experience, to learning. Yeah, that's good. I would ask too, I know we're getting close to time here, but we've got a lot of listeners out there who, maybe aren't academics or were in the university at one point, but who just are interested in these kinds of conversations. These are things that don't just apply in the academy, I would say. And particularly in our culture, we're at a time where it's very fraught, where there's tons of misunderstanding. There's echo chambers on social media. And I think a lot of the problems we see in society today can kind of be attributed to those kinds of things. Do you have any practical advice at all for how do people put this into practice in their daily lives? If they want to actually be able to converse in ways, to be able to talk about tough topics with their friends, to not just avoid things or kind of subtly lie to each other, how do you do this in an everyday life setting?
First, in person. I think in-person contact matters a lot. You can say really hard things to someone if you're looking them in the eye and they can see your affection and respect. I say affection because friendship seems to me to be the foundation of a lot of what it is that we're talking about. How do you allow these things to emerge naturally without being inhibited by fear? You do it through friendship. And so those are some important components. The other, and this is, I think, hard to achieve in a world where short is often better, but taking the chance to really engage with ideas fully, it's so, so important. So in general, when we talk about these kinds of practices, we encourage reading as much as possible before you come to a decision, doing the things that we teach our students to do, but not just for a research paper, but in your own life. If you're making a decision, if there's a subject that you're struggling with, do that literature review. Try to figure out what the different points of view are. What kind of evidence is being used? What are their methods? What are their intellectual commitments before you come up with your own conclusions? You might have a hypothesis as to what you think the right answer is, but before you come to those conclusions, do the work. And if you don't know, then I'd say hold off a little bit. And it's okay to say you don't know.
Yeah, which is so good. I think we don't like to sit in spaces of uncertainty. We like to think we have all the answers, but I think it's a lot better to be able to admit when you don't.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, so much for joining us today on Pep Talk. It was such a pleasure speaking with you and learning about the Academic Freedom Conference along with Pepperdine's dialogue dinners. Thank you, Coby, for co-hosting. And thank you all for listening today. We'll see you next time on the podcast.